Hey everyone, it's Kat, and I'm back today with another decoding. This one is a little long, so let's get started. It's called Which Way Western Man? Decoded. Although I was interested in what William Gayley Simpson had to say, it was no small task to keep reading his book until the end. Simpson seemed to have more luxury of time back then, or it could just be the pace of society in those days, combined with his university days writing college papers, but he made sure to explain particular points with thorough evidence. Today, we are in a quick, hurry world. Attention spans are at a minimum, and many times we are torn between various tasks performed simultaneously, so it makes it much harder to find the time to focus and read. Certain chapters made my eyes gloss over with boredom, and I had an aversion to a few things he said on particular topics, especially on women and marriage, things I found immoral and strongly disagree with, and so I also became suspicious of him. But I kept reading, and by the time I got to the last chapters, that suspicion dissipated. Even of those I still differed in opinion. I realized he really did care for our people and tried to offer the best solution to the problem at hand. William Gayley Simpson first wrote Which Way Western Man in 1948 and then revised it in 1973. What I like about this is that if you are truly seeking the truth, with each new revelation, you do have to go back and revise some of your earlier beliefs. I do this with my own work. What is profound to me is that what Simpson wrote over 52 years ago rings true today. He is one who could rightfully be called a seer. He saw the trend of where we're headed and unfortunately hit the nail on the head. So let's go through the book together with no better place to start than the beginning.
To my reader, Simpson remarks, you may find in this book ideas or ideals that at first hearing strike you as abhorrent. He's not kidding. They may clash with what you have long believed to represent the highest in human experience, or cherish as too holy to be questioned. Or you may find yourself chilled by conclusions that I reach or remedies that I press that you think too drastic. But I would remind you that the disintegration of our whole society is far advanced, that the time allowed us for action is short, and that the peril hanging over us is fearsome. Extreme emergencies may require extreme measures. Our need is for men of courage and women with independence of mind to set aside all taboos, men who will search and reassess the entire experience of our people with discernment and with insight, and will then have the resolution and the dedication to apply to the solution of our problems all the light and the fullest wisdom to which their search has led them, even though it cost them their lives. As long ago as 1920, I perceived that Western civilization was dying, said Simpson.
All we have to do is reflect on the expansion and then contraction of the white man's conquests to know this is true. We started out on our adventures mapping the whole world, establishing colonies in Athens, Persia, India, Africa, and sailing over to America, both north and south, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Today, we have pulled out of India, pulled out of our colonies in Africa. We closed most of our bases in Asia, and now the white countries remaining are seeing an influx of non-Friends. We are losing those too.
Simpson reflects, I must find ground that I had reason to believe I could stand on, ground that I was sure would support me.
This is so critical. This is why so many people are confused and frustrated in their search for truth. They are not grounded, and run off of their imagination instead. Then they get mad when you share uncomfortable truths with them. If they really desire the truth, they will have to read these books for themselves and get grounded. Simpson grew up in the age before the internet, so if he wanted to learn the truth about our world, he had to read the actual books. That is the same thing we need to do today. We already know the internet is monitored and scrubbed to stifle our voices and push their narrative. Type in a Google search for 2021 riots and see what comes up. Notice there are no photos of BLM riots, only the staged Capitol event, pushing a particular narrative. So why wouldn't they push their narrative on other taboo topics that we research? The undying purpose, the ennobling of man. So Simpson begins his book by giving us a glimpse of what a young, naive lad he was, wanting to make the world a better place. Viewing the world just as our programmers wanted him to, just as many of us did before we woke up. He studied to be a minister at Union Theological Seminary and graduated 3 years later, magna cum laude. He was offered a prestigious position at the college church in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, but turned that down after reading Sabatier's Life of St. Francis. That book so strongly affected him that in 1920 he decided to live as St. Francis, giving up all of his worldly possessions and moving to the Negro section of Wallington, New Jersey.
Simpson said, I was penniless, and with little more than the clothes I was wearing and some tools to work with, I went back to the town in which I had had my church, there to do my labour as a gift and to learn to depend for my own needs, no matter where I might be and what people wanted to give me.
Simpson and a few like-kind men made a shanty on land donated to them next to the town dump. They would work sun up to sundown, helping anyone in need in the community.
But, he continues, by the summer of 1929, however, my faith in the course I had been following began to break down. I saw that a pure heart and will was not of itself enough. The needs of my mind and a certain realistic common sense began to reassert themselves. Moreover, I was finding myself deeply moved by what I read in Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Thus I came to be so shaken with uncertainty that I could not go on. I left Wallington, never to return, and my Franciscan venture of faith came to a complete end.
It's ironic that I just watched a series on Netflix a few days ago, season 3 of The Sinner, and it was all about a crazy white man influenced by Nietzsche. Of course, they distort Nietzsche's philosophy, just like they do of other brilliant whites, in hopes that we believe the propaganda and not look further into the writings of these higher men who can enlighten us.
Simpson further states, I am very well aware that the very name Nietzsche is a definite roadblock in the minds of many, but I judge that, as a rule, this is not because such people have read him firsthand or with any degree of thoroughness. Rather, it is that Nietzsche's name has been blackened and his teaching misrepresented by those who lack the insight and comprehension to appreciate what he was about, or by those who had reason to hate all he stood for.
By those who had reason to hate all he stood for. I wonder who those people are. The continuing search from St. Francis to Nietzsche. After 9 years of serving others, he became completely disenchanted with his work.
Simpson reflects, I began to feel that to too large an extent I had been under Jesus' spell, that it was spiritual suicide to walk in the steps of any man, let alone Jesus, and that it became a hindrance to realising and fulfilling my own life.
Inherent within him was a desire to be with men of like kind.
Even when I had struggled hardest to make myself equal with the lowest and least, at the bottom of my quest had been my desire to find those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. My willingness any longer to hold myself stripped for others' sake, to call nothing of my own, to give anything I had to anyone who might want it, was now undermined by my clearing perception that men are by no means equal, that many of them were not even my equal.
We know that the communist agenda being pushed on us today is all about equalitarianism. They push that all men are equal. This isn't true. No amount of help can lift up a low IQ person to someone that is high IQ. You are either born with it or not. And we know through the study of race that the different races have different IQ levels. That is not racist. That is the truth. God made man with different brain capacities as he did with the animals.
Despite their friendliness, precious few of the people about us had any interest in our presence among them deeper than the opportunity we afforded to get good work done for little or nothing.
Simpson saw that by lowering himself to help the low was bringing him down to their level. It wasn't lifting them up in any way. That he was not fulfilling the purpose that was inherent in him to aspire to. In addition to the low, he knew he would get grief from his peers.
Yet I foreknew that people would turn away from me if I gave up my Franciscan way of life, especially the church people, and to their minds to turn away from their ideals might well have seemed a descent to lower ideals, or an abandonment of all ideals, that their Christianity might be a sickness, and that my sloughing it off might be a precursor to convalescence and a sign of hope and new life. That of course rarely occurred to them.
I know the feeling, and I'm sure many of you do too. I was only into Christian identity for a few months, but when I left, I garnered more hate from Christians than I ever had from any other people. They think I am totally lost now. They can't fathom that what might be the issue here is Christianity itself. They don't dare turn their eyes to that option.
Simpson further explains, it is no less than a crime against life when the superior is sacrificed to the inferior, a crime that is in no wise mitigated nor its effects alleviated when the sacrifice is made by a man's own free will and choice. He goes on, our belief in equality likewise was a betrayal of life, I should say, rather of quality of life, where all are believed equal. The voice of the superior man is drowned in the roar of the mob, and taste tends to gravitate to the level of the gutter. This is happening all over America. Furthermore, wherever this belief in equality spreads, there goes a disbelief in the importance of heredity, of blood.
Jesus' tribute and reappraisal. Simpson starts this chapter with part of a poem by William Blake called The Everlasting Gospel. The vision of Christ that thou dost see is my vision's greatest enemy. Thine has a great hook nose like thine. Mine has a snub nose like to mine. Thine is the friend of all mankind. Mine speaks in parables to the blind. Thine loves the same world that mine hates. Thy heaven's doors are my hell gates. Both read the Bible day and night, but thou readst black where I read white. Although Simpson walks away from Christianity, he still believes that Jesus was real and tries to fit Jesus into his new worldview. I did this too at first with Jesus and the Bible when reading the Ora Linda book, and I had quite a few comments from people trying to do this incorporating gymnastics as well. But in the end, I realized it doesn't work because out of the two books, one is made up while the other is real. One frees us from mental slavery, while the other keeps us in bondage to the hook-nosed masters. Arthur Desmond's poem is much more fitting than Blake's. He writes, "Jewish books are for the Jews, and Jew messiahs too. But if you're not of Jewish blood, how can they be for you? To make an idol of a book is poison for the brain. A dying God upon a cross is reason gone insane. Beware of all holy books, and all the creeds and schools, and every law that man has made, and all the golden rules. Laws and rules imposed on you from days of old renown are not intended for your good, but for your crushing down. Then dare to rend the chains that bind, and to yourself be true. Dare to liberate your mind from all things old and new. Always think your own thought, all other thoughts reject. Learn to use your own brain, and boldly stand erect." Parable of the Wheat and the Tares. Simpson makes an excellent observation of Christianity using the parable of the wheat and the tares.
He writes, "The church has been the great enemy of the life of man. In the parable, the sower sowed seed in his field, hoping that it would grow each according to its kind, in fulfilment of the shape and colour and strength it bore within itself. But in the night an enemy came and sowed tares in the field. But the tares were not so bad as what the church has done to the field. With the tares the seed could at least struggle. Some of it might come to be what it was meant to be, but the church has sterilised the soil so that nothing would grow at all, so that even the weeds grow sickly. The church has taken away his struggle, without which there is no growth, no fulfilment. It has not, as it were, told the seed that it was a life and death necessity to struggle to get its roots deep down into the soil, to food and drink, and to force its tender shoots up towards the sky, to sun and air. On the contrary, it has told the seed that all this costly and painful labour has been done for it by another, Jesus, and that if only the seed would accept this as fact and rest in it, eventually it would be transplanted to another garden and be miraculously transformed into full-grown and perfect flowers. But there isn't any other garden. Regardless of locale, all life is one, so that the net result is that the garden remains barren and bare. The seed, which might have come to every sort of flower and fruit, comes to nothing. It rots in the ground, and it was this that made Nietzsche to declare that the two greatest stupefiers of the Western world have been alcohol and Christianity.
Have the tares ever been pulled up? Has there ever been a time in the past that our enemies have been uprooted, saved by us? It is madness to think that some miracle will save us when we have been given free will to be responsible for ourselves and to suffer whatever consequences our actions would bring. Once proud, noble, and strong people, we now go out with a whimper, weak-minded and weak-willed. Jesus in retrospect. Simpson concludes that Jesus and his teachings are actually detrimental to our health and survival.
He states, "This is the fate to which any people exposes itself that follows Jesus century after century in his disregard of the physical, of the earth, of diet, sex, beauty, breeding, and the doctrine of the thoroughbred. It unfits them for survival. He was so set on the fruits that he forgot the roots, and in the end roots decide. Without healthy roots, the best plants die." Jesus' exclusive emphasis on the so-called spiritual is pernicious and ruinous. This is revealed and proved for more than any but a very few people today realise by the decadence so marked in this Western world of ours, which has longest and most clearly been exposed to Jesus' teaching we are marked for extinction. Through Jesus and Christianity, hand in hand with democracy and its mob rule, we see that the suffrage has been pushed down ever deeper into the social mass until now every ignoramus, nitwit and trifler can have his share in determining the direction of the people. For men are not equal, and the best should rule, and when a people prevents their rule, the end is destruction. A people's religion should come out of its own blood. Jesus was a Jew, and therefore in his religion Oriental. Jew and Nordic belong to two different worlds, and never the twain shall meet.
Religion did come out of our people's own blood in the beginning, and we did have a direct relationship with the Creator. No middleman needed. Who is the epitome of the middleman? The one who wears the yarmulke in religion, in trade, in the media, and in the money system.
When people of this blood, Aryan blood, begin to show symptoms of communism, it can have only one meaning. Somehow their resistance has been so lowered that they have become the victims of a virulent infection. And this is what I finally have to declare. The influence of Jesus upon our life to be, whether at its worst, as it comes from the church, or at its best as it flows from his teaching itself, it is an alien, Oriental, Jewish infection. All through the centuries, it has meant our weakening, our sickening, our self-betrayal. Indeed, from the beginning, it virtually implied and actually involved our gradual enslavement to values, to ideals, and to means that violated our instincts. Invariably and inevitably, if any people gives up the religion of its own creation to take up the religion of an alien people, it surrenders its independence and to a considerable extent its identity. For our people to have adopted Christianity was to yield up their life to the direction of Jews. Jesus was a Jew by adoption, if not by blood. The Bible is Jewish from cover to cover. The Jew Marcus Eli Ravage actually bragged of the proven control of our whole Aryan civilization by the Jewish Gospels, and concluded triumphantly, "No conquest in history can even remotely compare with this clean sweep of our conquest of you, Aryans."
The meaning of Nietzsche for the modern world.
His one concern behind everything he said, Nietzsche, was for quality of human life. For him it was never enough that mankind should merely go on, he must go up. Superman is one who seeks to create beyond himself. The beyond man will be above and beyond anything we know of as human now.
Stalin usurped Nietzsche's teachings of the Übermensch. Stalin means man of steel or Superman. As they do, they take the advice meant for our people and use it against us.
For Nietzsche, the only proper, or certainly the primary, object of any society was the production of the largest possible number of superior men. Produce great men and put them at the helm, and their wisdom will make your society stable, enduring and happy, and their creative powers as seers, philosophers, artists and the like will make your society significant and its name glorious. Blinded to the fact that human life is of very unequal worth, we actually sacrifice the more valuable to the less valuable. In our folly we burden the sound and the capable among us with the support and care of a colossal load of human wreckage, millions of morons, feeble-minded, insane, criminals, and all sorts of the hopelessly incurable who can never come to anything whatever. Moreover, the feeble-minded are notoriously prolific. The cost of carrying all this load is prodigious, and it is growing. If we do not soon reverse the present process, the land will at last be possessed by those unable even to take care of themselves. We are following the path of national and racial suicide.
Who does the burden fall to for these generational welfare abusers? How about the flood of illegal immigrants coming in? Whose burden is it? It is on the backs of the hard-working mass man, but even more so on the hard-working backs of higher man, making it almost impossible for him to come out from under that burden and raise up our society.
Nietzsche hated with a profound hatred all the equalitarian doctrines, democracy along with socialism and communism. In his eyes, they were the great levellers, the great enemies of all quality of life and of all higher men. They levelled and they levelled downward. Nietzsche condemned Christianity. He linked it with alcoholism as one of the two great European narcotics. He condemned Christianity for exactly the same reason that Jesus condemned the Pharisees as an enemy of life. He condemned it because it diverted attention from and poisoned belief in strong and beautiful life here and now on the earth. But above all, he condemned it as a gospel by which the weak shall inherit the earth. The weak, sickly, the mediocre, the malady of which the whole white man's world is dying, is Christianity.
An added faculty of perception.
Most species are known to have degenerated or to have become altogether extinct than to have survived or advanced, and loath though we may be to admit the fact, it would seem that man is no exception to the forces that operate in the rise and fall of other forms of life.
During our modern times, the pygmy in South Africa and the aborigine in Tasmania have gone extinct.
Our world today is dying, in large part because for so long we either have not produced superior men or have not heeded them. The hour has come now, once more, when we must build as the ancients built. We must recognise that men are not equal, and set the God-men apart, and yield them reverence. This we must do for the sake of our very existence. It will ensure that the race not only goes on, but goes up.
In 1864, roughly 100 years prior to Simpson's writing, Richard Lee wrote in his The Extinction of Races a very different view of the future, one in which followed natural law, World's law, one in which the white man followed his destined path in this world. Lee writes, "Between the white and the colored populations of which we speak, there are not even degrees of civilization. The man who now wanders free through the unknown wilds of Australia represents nothing. Not only has he not advanced in moral development since the first formation of his species, but he has actually retrograded. There are not even the traditions of past renown among his ancestors to arouse those inspiriting emotions which should stimulate him to preserve the existence and identity of his race. And even where, as in the Maori or Polynesian, a certain pride of birth and dignity still cling, there is no bond, certainly not one of nationality, to secure them from the inevitable effects which greater moral power, under such circumstances, seems intended to produce. Rather then, we must regard it as only an illustration of humanity in its crudest form, shrinking and passing away before a phase of humanity enlightened with intelligence and endowed with vast intellectual superiority. It is the lesser light destroying the darkness, and though a great brilliancy should ages hence appear, it will still continue to burn, mellow and made more luminous through the accumulated experience of time. What happened between Lee's time and Simpson's to our people? Reorientation to social problems. Mass man versus higher man. Simpson cleverly explains the difference between mass man and higher man using a body analogy.
He writes, the very basis of the structural organisation of all the higher forms of life is differentiation. All cells serve the life of the whole organism. True, but they serve very different functions. The welfare of the whole depends upon each one's doing faithfully and efficiently and unquestioningly the task that has fallen to it. But whereas some have a part in serving the organism as eyes, ears, brain and the like, others function in the process of elimination, and still others as feet merely to carry the load of the organism, to get it hither and yon, as its brain and instinct may direct. Each has a sense of worth that comes from knowing itself indispensable to the life of the whole, apart from which it could not exist, and each is provided for as essential to the whole, but indisputably some are high and some are low, some give orders and others obey them.
No better example of the body analogy coming to life was in Hitler's Germany. All the people came together as a whole. All performed the essential tasks so that Germany's great men could lift them up and take them out of poverty and despair. Hitler would visit the manual labor workers, building the roads, the factory workers, the shipbuilders. He let them know how much he appreciated them, that they were in a large part the reason why the life of Germans improved so immensely in only a few short years. They enabled higher man to have the freedom and time to create. In only a few short years, through their genius brains and resources available within the country, they invented synthetic rubber, the high-speed Autobahn, jet airplanes, the V-2 rocket and the helicopter, and an inexpensive car called the People's Wagon, the Volkswagen. While the rest of the world suffered in the Great Depression, Germany thrived, in large part due to their functioning as a healthy body.
The qualities that I should place absolutely first are those by which alone a man can climb out of the seemingly changeless, ever-sucking abyss of unthinking, unaspiring, undifferentiated, mass man, and attain unto a life of his own, inwardly rooted and inwardly directed. I do not entirely identify the inert mass with working people, though doubtless they constitute a very large proportion of it. But to my mind, a man of any class is, and must be, mass man until he has learned to break his dependence on others. He must cease to be content to float like a cork on the current of life. His primary dissatisfaction must be not with others, not with his environment, not with an economic or political system, but above all with himself. He must have come to a vision of life ahead of where he stands, and must want to ever outgrow what he is, that he may give his bones and his flesh to his vision. He must therefore be one whose very nature it is to risk himself and to spend himself, even unto exhaustion, for the sake of what he most loves and believes in. And the weapon, what has been the chief weapon to this end? Oh, of course, when it was time for it, when it was deemed expedient, force has been used. But against the strong and the noble, this was hardly the most effective weapon, for they were rarely to be daunted by threat of force. Besides, there was another weapon, which for use all year round, in time of peace as in time of war, was a weapon effective beyond all others, against any and every sort of person, but especially against the strong and the noble. This was the poison contained in the little word selfish. If that could somehow be made palatable, perhaps by a very sweet coating of a sure reward in heaven for humility, for meekness, perhaps the strong, noble man might be induced to take it, and having taken it, he would be slowly, almost imperceptibly, poisoned against himself and against his strong nature, until he was ashamed of it, and striving to renounce it for the sake of what was declared virtue, and to escape the threatened pains of hell or the certain pains of present opprobrium. He would get down and walk through life on his knees, and thus make himself small like the rest, like the herd.
Selfish has changed to the word racist today.
Our giants are tied down by Lilliputians.
The inevitable foundations of any sound society.
The only end worthy to be the primary object of any people's existence is, as I think, to produce the largest possible number of truly superior men, of robust health, overflowing energy, unspoiled instinct, mind powerful to both analyse and create, and, above all, of that integrated, masterful personality and elevated spirit that ever characterises the truly noble man. The quality of its top 10% must constantly be maintained if it is ever to amount to anything or even long to survive. When the common people seize the helm and undertake to steer affairs in their own interest, all they can do, all they ever have done, ultimately is to run the ship aground and be forced in the end to return the command to one or a few. Democracy, that is, a government set up by the people as a whole and controlled directly or indirectly by the majority of the citizens, something our founding fathers were careful to see that we did not get, which probably we never have had and certainly do not have now, stands revealed in the light of history as the most fragile, the most corrupt, the most short-lived and the least fruitful of all forms of government.
People today who only get a brief study of history at school, and only the history that our controllers want us to know, skewed by them, have no idea how empires, countries rise and fall. It was a common occurrence in the past. We are not invincible, as we are brought up and taught to believe. America will fall. Not only will she fall, but fall much sooner than many other great empires.
When the superior 10% rule, on the other hand, depends every people's entire cultural significance, and even its very existence. Moreover, wherever there is solidarity in a people, as there is in every true people, in every great people, the masses find a compensation for their limited circumstances in the achievements of their great men, since they know that without their labour and devotion their great men could hardly have done their work. They feel, and they feel justly, that the achievements of their great men are in substantial part their own achievements, because they too belong, because they know themselves to be indispensable, indeed to be the very foundation of the whole society. They also share the glory.
And that is why Hitler was so loved by his people. He gave them purpose. They belonged and knew they were an integral part in lifting up their country. The fallacy and failure of popular government.
The stark fact is that even we, as a people, are already very near the end of our run, not merely the United States, but the whole white man's world, and the white man himself. The 2 world wars were a roaring plunge into barbarism. We long ago moved into an era of mass deception, wholesale betrayal and naked brute force, in which aristocratic values will be regarded increasingly as a luxury few can afford. We shall soon be locked in a struggle for sheer survival and shall hardly escape catastrophe. Perhaps Russia will continue to avoid direct open confrontation with us, but if so, we shall only the more certainly be manoeuvred into yet a 3rd world war, in which the communist instigated and communist led coloured hordes of virtually the entire earth will press upon us from every side, and at the same time our defence will be sabotaged and paralysed by communist traitors planted at key points within our walls. Sooner or later, in one way or another, our gates will be forced and our city put to the torch and sword. Our civilization will go up in flames, and the proud white man who created it, who for long thought himself, and virtually was, invincible, will have to bend his neck to a yoke in order to live.
I just read recently that Christianity is now the minority religion in the UK. And we know that Christianity, even though it is not truly the white man's religion, is associated with the white man. And so, by saying Christianity is now the minority, is in fact saying that the white man is now a minority in his own lands. We are literally on the precipice now, with nowhere to run.
We are now about to pass into eclipse. The blackest hour in our history is almost upon us, but even in the hours of my darkest brooding over the onrushing tragedy, I am sustained by a hope, perhaps even a faith, that no possible conquest of the white peoples will ever permanently break their strength. Into their humiliation and their agony they will carry their most ancient traditions, the glory of their past, and their memories of the days when their whole world was shaped by their deep, instinctive belief in the superior man, and their destinies guided by the noblest and strongest among them. In time, thus, they will awake to a realization of the mistakes that brought them low, and at last see clearly that one of the most ruinous of these was the doctrine of human equality and the practice of popular government that grew out of it. And as their vision clears and their faith returns, they will spit upon the doctrine of human equality, their contempt and disgust, and in their newfound strength rise up to grapple with their conqueror and overthrow him. And then, as they once again lift their eyes to the heights, new heights, higher than they ever looked to before, and begin to cast about them to set their course, they will vow ever to search out the best men among them to be their leaders.
The blackest hour is upon us now. They are flooding us with everything black, from movies like Wakanda and Black Adam to hiring blacks in almost all the news anchors and news reporter positions, putting in black politicians, all black British sporting teams, to all the black models in commercials, on the internet and in print, to replacing European history with black history, to flooding our countries with the blackest of black from Africa into our lands. It's upon us now, the blackest hour. Fear of a black planet in white lands, all courtesy of the Jews. Who is behind democracy?
Democracy is inverted monarchy, which suggests a pyramid stood on its apex. The trader, the middleman, the commercial man, who uses his hands only to turn over deal after deal, and out of each one to squeeze money. Above all, the financiers and big bankers, whose aim is even to make money out of nothing, and who have perfected means for doing precisely this on a colossal scale, and doing it invisibly. With all these men, whom aristocratic societies have commonly placed low, if not at the very bottom, where democracy has allowed to come to the top.
The nature of higher man.
We must remind ourselves that it is precisely men of the loftiest spirit and supreme creative powers who are least free to do what they feel like. For them, life has no meaning and grows stale in their mouths, except as they live for something rare and lofty and beyond themselves. Theirs, as I conceive it, is the only real liberty, the liberty of the man who is most completely possessed by what he is.
You are most likely higher men and women to be so awake, to grasp the ideas of Nietzsche, to break all the programming since birth, puts you in a position to go beyond what you are and feel true liberty. On the uselessness of voting today.
The ballot represents such a comminution of political power, even to its vanishing point, that I can but hold it in contempt. In view of the control of the political machines by Wall Street or some similar clique, with interests quite contrary to the good of the country as a whole, and because, as a result of the total electoral process, the men put up for office are usually so mediocre that no man of wisdom and character would care to be represented by any one of them. I have gradually come to feel that voting is about as useful as casting a chip into a puddle. Disraeli spoke of that fatal drollery called representative government. Certainly, to give people the idea that they are free because they have the ballot is nothing less than fraud. Rather, is the feeling of freedom thus engendered a means by which their essential slavery is hid from their eyes, and the more securely fastened upon them? Behind this camouflage, a plutocracy, one of the nastiest and basest of all forms of government, has been able to make the people its unwitting accomplice in their own degradation and in the most wanton and unprecedented exploitation of the natural resources upon which our entire future as a nation depends.
What really surprises me is that so many so-called awake people are still fooled by elections. They think that Trump is basically their messiah, when all they have to do is a little digging to see what a charlatan he is. Both sides are controlled and have been for a very long time. We did have good presidents in the founding fathers, as well as Jackson and Lincoln, but all the modern ones were bought, paid for, and controlled to our detriment. Trump married a tranny. Melania is an anagram for I am male. And he wears orange tanning spray to prove his allegiance, because orange is 33 in numerology. His massive debts were paid by the small hat Sheldon Adelson. In turn, Trump moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They then put Trump on their special temple coin, along with Cyrus, their other hero who freed the Jews from Babylon.
In the end, my examination of the doctrine of equality forces me to the conclusion that at bottom it is nothing but the envious and resentful cry of the inferior man against the superior, the battle cry by which he would rally other inferior men to his standard, and not only overthrow the rule of the superior, but abolish all recognition of superiority, and thus establish a world favourable to those who are now weak, ugly, dull and generally botched. It is basically a cry of insurrection.
Bastards and broken things, like in Game of Thrones, where the little man is the wisest and the cripple takes the throne. They even have a broken thing for the ones that prefer science to Christianity. Stephen Hawking was the modern-day oracle. Bastards and broken things, where the weak, infirmed, and disabled rise to the top. She is made to feel good about her choice. Squirmy and grubs. Past the point of no return. The tyranny of the few over the many is always subject to limits. That of the many over the few has none. Dermot Mora.
No matter where Jesus stands in the matter, this idea that every man has great worth and that society must be ordered in constant remembrance of it and slavish regard for it is one of the doctrines that make Christianity the enemy, even the arch-enemy of the highest end of man. Any belief about a hereafter or a beyond that does not somehow exalt, enrich and strengthen life here and now is our deadly poison, and any in our midst who are enticed by it and misled by it are our deadly foes. This is basic. The noble values of the warrior gave way to the diseased values of the priest. Time and again, if not always in the end, they have succumbed to the machinations of the priest or of a merchant and the banker. And considerable evidence indicates that Moscow is as much under the control of the money power as is Washington DC. The end aimed at is the overthrow of the nationhood of every country, one by one, and the herding of its people, like so many cattle, through the wide gate of the United Nations, into the corral of a world government, where they can the more surely, efficiently, and safely be mulcted. Man's fate hinges on his ability to find some means by which to break the money power. Under democracy, of course, there isn't an answer.
Beware of those on the internet and elsewhere that try to convince you that somehow Putin is a good guy and that the Jews left Russia. The truth is that the Jews took over Russia with their Bolshevik Revolution, and they've been there ever since. They want the West to think that communism died and that perestroika is a Russian idea, bringing democracy to the East. But communism, run by the Jews, never went away. They just went from overt, which wasn't working fast enough for them, to covert. A good book to read on the topic is New Lies for Old by Anatoly Golitsyn.
My coldly realistic examination of our present predicament compels me to think that we have passed the point of no return, and shall have to suffer our way through the hideous fate planned for us. But this will in time run its course, for the seeds of the money power's undoing are in itself, and they will bring forth a rebellion so universal and so fierce that in the end the usurping tyrants will be swept into the sea. And then, when the peoples of the earth, freed at last from the vampire that has been living on their blood, address themselves to the task of the building anew their several nationhoods and states, they will need to remember the historical evidence that their surest, oftenest tried and best proved protection against a renascent money power is a king whose first duty shall be to see that no power, whether by hook or by crook, is ever allowed even to question, let alone to trespass upon, that right and power in which their sovereignty is concentrated, the right and their power to issue their own money free of all debt and obligation.
It could be a king, but it could be a dictator as well. One like Hitler, who came from more humble roots. Higher man isn't just in the upper class, he can be from any class. In the days of the Orlinda book, the rulers were elected by the people, and they had 3-year terms, except for the burgmatron, whose position was for life, like the judges on the Supreme Court. The aristocracy came about because a king got too comfy in his rule and married off all his children to the powerful families in neighboring lands. Friezo comes to mind. He might have been a good ruler at the time, but there was no guarantee that his family members could rule as well as he. As Nietzsche says, higher man needs to earn his position through his own struggle. One who is born into a family to rule doesn't earn anything. He is just given, and this is what makes decadence and service to self. Hitler earned his way up.
But as far as we are concerned, we Americans, we modern white men of Western civilization, among us it is not going to get started, not as any form of social organisation, not in our day. Our chance to build this way has gone. The whole tradition has been thoroughly destroyed. Our way to a new aristocracy lies through chaos. We shall first have to become ashes before the phoenix of a new nobility shall rise in our midst. But if the world holds together, there will at last be those, a few, always a few, who will again start the old long climb towards the heights, and again lay out the road to a world in which superiority of every sort shall thrive. In the meantime, there is work enough for us Aryan men to do.
A reset is needed so that this web of enslavement can fall, both physically and mentally. I think of Elon Musk's Skylink, which is so eerily familiar to the Terminator's Skynet, and with people being injected with foreign particles that enhance the signal connecting them to that link, so that there is no escape. The only true escape is from having the whole system come crashing down. In the meantime, though, there is work enough for us to do. Wake up as many of our people as you can. so that the ones that make it through won't make the same mistakes again. Toward an understanding of women.
Male and female are the opposite poles of creation. Man and woman are an expression of this on the human plane. Life for each sex is fullest and richest, and the life of society most healthy when these polar differences are maintained. But it is not a matter of equality or inequality. Women are greater in some ways, men greater in others. The sexes are complementary. In nature's total economy together, they round out a perfect whole. Man has been the warrior and wanderer, fighting, loving and exploring, while the woman has lived at home and cared for the children. Today everywhere young women have been made to think that they ought to want what they do not really want at all, to look down upon what in their hearts they long for the most. The feminist woman is poisoned with the idea that to be a man is more desirable than to be a woman, and that to distinguish oneself in what has been man's field is more admirable and socially more important than to be a great mother and a homemaker, or that power behind the throne which a wife can be in the life of a man.
A burg matron was her own power. She never desired to be a man. Vestal virgins were higher women. Simpson must never have had a woman in his life that was very wise. Women can be seers, philosophers, thinkers too. In the beginning, it was the burg matrons, women, who the community, including the kings, went to for advice. She was the wise one that people would come to solve their disputes, to give advice and guidance on strategic actions of war and in dealing with people outside of Freya's lands. So I don't agree with Simpson that women need to be behind the throne of her man. They can sit side by side just as a king and queen would. Yes, they have different roles, but the roles have equal power and are complementary, two halves of a whole. Nietzsche said it best, "Of man there is little here, therefore do their women masculinize themselves, for only he who is man enough will save the woman in woman." And Simpson added, "To have true women again, we must first have real men." In Freya's land, the women were women, but if they had to pick up the sword to save their people, they would, such as Adela did when her family was ambushed. Simpson also attempts to make the case that women should marry young, in their teens, marry a man at least 10 years older, and have her first child before she turns 20. This is where Simpson and I part in our views. It reminds me of Satanism, where they treat the child as a young adult, and with the Abrahamic religions that say it's okay to marry a child and to even have sex with the girl. No way. We have the morals written in our hearts, and there's no way my heart tells me that this would ever be okay. Women are too immature in their teens, and it would be child rape, plain and simple. I also believe that the man and woman should be of similar age. This way they have similar levels of maturity, as well as being able to relate to each other in all aspects of culture, history, etc. Basically growing up together. Young birds don't breed with old birds, young lions with old lions. They breed with mates of similar age. If you get two people together of different generations, they can't relate. And if they can't relate, they will have a loveless marriage. I understand Simpson is trying to work out the ideal situation where many children can be produced, but you can't ignore the feelings of the heart and happiness. A couple in love makes for a happy family. Love is needed for the children to grow up happy and healthy. If we look to the Orlinda book, young people were required to marry by the age of 25. That would include the woman as well as the man. This would make them similar in age. If we look to Hitler's Germany, there was no mention of men needing to be much older than their wives. Couples married of similar age and had happy and healthy marriages with many offspring.
He goes on, stating that we should allow men who are financially able to have more than one wife or to introduce concubinage.
Concubines? A harem? Handmaid's Tale, anyone? No way. Why even exist if we can't have love in marriage? Not a master servant type role. Equals is what is needed. Equals and love. Simpson even cites the Kinsey report as if this is a good thing. Kinsey was a bisexual who didn't have a problem with having sex with children and had an open marriage with his wife and would have promiscuous sex. Simpson also says men can't be monogamous, but I think this is just an excuse for a weakness that Simpson has. In the time of the Orelinda book, men and women were monogamous. I wish Simpson had a chance to read this book, for it could have helped him with his flawed thinking here. I almost stopped reading at this point. I was honestly disgusted. But I didn't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and I read on.
Simpson adds, apparently the explanation is that when restraint is placed upon the sexual impulse of a population, there is a gradual accumulation of energy that finds an outlet in exploration, conquest of every sort, both material and spiritual, and every sort of cultural creativeness.
And I would add that yes, when man and woman behave sexually as world had designed them, meaning in monogamous relationships without promiscuity, then that would open the doors to exploring in other creative outlets. Notice with the typical Fryan family, they did have many children, and the man was able to explore and do other endeavors. It is the sickness of the small hat where we get this promiscuity through the use of drugs and pornography, among other social engineering. Because the small hat does not want us to follow our natural creative pursuits. Little girls today are sexualized. The little girl feels that she has to look sexy, like a prostitute, and that her most important goal in life is to get a baby daddy. How awful and different from what Ralda intended. The days of the honorable and wise Berg matrons are a thing of the past, and the tender nurturer and teacher of the young, known as the mother, is long forgotten. It seems even Simpson was ignorant to the true nature of woman. Internationalism versus nationalism.
Internationalism would break or frustrate or paralyse all the affinities and social structures by which individuals now band with others of their own kind for mutual defence against aggression, to ensure their security and independence, to shut out all human types they feel to be alien to themselves or inferior, and thus be free and able to work together toward the realisation of their hopes, their dreams, and the destiny they feel stirring within them. By this means, nationalism, they preserve their identity as a people and gain the collective strength to make of their common life an expression of themselves, something deeply satisfying, something in which they can take pride, something full of meaning and promise.
So the international bankers, the Jews, have to break all of our bonds so we are incapable of fighting back. Break us by country, by race, and by family. We can see that going on today, flooding our lands with foreigners, with people of alien races, by having families turn on each other through religion and other social conditioning until we are completely isolated individuals with no bonds, no protection.
He, the Jew, may be the leader in the concerted and worldwide effort to break down segregation among other peoples, but he certainly sticks to it doggedly for himself. In Israel, even today, marriage of Jews and Gentiles is legally impossible, and in every Orthodox Jewish congregation, any Jew who marries a Gentile is marked off as dead. Internationalism would atomise mankind. It would break down nations and people into a populous mishmash. Anybody could marry anybody, and in the end there would be only one race the earth over, the result of mixing all the races together. All men would become little more than slaves, fit only to labour under orders and to empty their pockets at the markets. The human being of the future is significantly and fittingly prefigured in the statue to man that stands in the UN building in New York City, without sex, muscle or any facial feature, and his hands behind his buttocks where he can be easily manacled, the real and ultimate goal of the United Nations. 25 years ago, so over 75 from today, Dr. Einstein and President Hutchins lifted their voices to cry aloud to the world that after the atom bomb an international government was our only hope. Many other personages have since followed suit, but through it all I have found reason to believe that fear of the atom bomb was deliberately worked up in order to stampede the peoples of the earth into the kraal of the world's slave state, where, like cows, they could most easily and safely be milked and in due time slaughtered.
Note what tribe Einstein is from, so we know they're pushing the same program today with their fake COVID and global warming agendas.
Internationalism may hasten the day when red, white, yellow and black will have so intermingled and intermarried that there will be no more Americans or English or Russians or Negroes or Japanese, but only people, only human beings. It is as though you would try to undo eons of evolution and would reduce roses, snapdragons, hollyhocks and devil's paintbrushes to one flower, reminiscent of each but preserving the beauty and fragrance of none.
The day is here when there will be no more Americans. Anyone can call themselves American today. You don't have to be white. You don't have to speak English. You don't even have to be born here. The American is extinct.
It is easy to criticise Hitler and the Nazis, quite apart from all the lies about them that we have been told. But as yet no one has pointed out how else the crushed German people could have got on their feet. American critics of nationalism may regard it in a very different light when it come our turn to be the nation desperate.
The necessity of eugenics.
Our national government spends over $300,000 per year to improve the genetic qualities of horses, cattle and pigs, but not a cent for the eugenic improvement of man.
Somehow it's okay to improve the genetics of animals, but it is sinful to improve our own human race. Or has this social conditioning been put into our brain? What is the one tribe that is doing everything they can to improve their own race?
Our present social setup is steadily producing, as long as it lasts cannot fail to produce, a literal degeneration of our kind, of the calibre of our national and racial stock. Our good and our best are being outbred by our mediocre and by our worst, and to be outbred means to be replaced as surely as if they had been conquered by bombs and bayonets and then massacred. They are removed from the earth, the masses multiply like rabbits, and our best, such best as we still have, though no longer the equal of our best of 50 to 100 years ago, are shoved into oblivion. We are steadily becoming a people of average lower intelligence, feebler character, and reduced stamina.
It reminds me of the movie Idiocracy. The film tells the story of Corporal Joe Bowers, a U.S. Army soldier of very average intelligence, who takes part in a government experiment that goes awry. Joe wakes up in the year 2505, where he finds out that he is the smartest person on the planet due to the dumbing down of the world from mass commercialism, rampant anti-intellectualism, and the domination of what it calls low culture. But we know what is really going on. It is the inverse eugenics program where mass man is breeding like rabbits and higher man is dying out, along with all the social engineering promoting base culture of the lower races. If we look to nature, we do see the survival of the fittest in the species, where the weak die young and the strong reach maturity, mate, and thus improve their offspring.
No one who sins against the laws of the universe ever escapes the consequences. And the law that I am particularly concerned about is this: any organism that fails to excrete its waste products dies. But the greater tragedy is that most of us can look day after day upon this spectacle of obviously botched and sickly humanity without being overcome again and again by feelings of disgust and of dismay. More justly alarming and more ominous for the future of our country than even the prevalence of disease and ugliness in our midst is our indifference to them. However, the problem of the insane is less disturbing than the problem of the feeble-minded. Feeble-mindedness is a matter of a mind's failing to develop, whereas insanity is a matter of a mind's developing abnormally. There are several grades of mental defectiveness. The idiot has the intelligence of an average child of 2 to 4 years and can learn to do only the simplest tasks. The imbecile, with the intelligence of a child of 3 to 7, is unable to earn himself a living. The moron has a mental age of 7 to 12 and under direction can be more or less self-supporting and a humbly useful member of society. These three grades occur in about the proportions of 3, 15 and 82% respectively of the defective population. Above this entire group comes the yet larger number of the borderline and dull normal people, who in many ways constitute the greatest danger of all, for the reason that, though they have a grade of intelligence little above that of children, they cannot be treated as children or be put under supervision, but on the contrary are endowed with citizenship, the right to vote, and a degree of responsibility they are quite unqualified to bear.
Notice the moron is the borderline functioning member of society, and notice how the Omicron virus is given to the ignorant and brainwashed. Omicron is a perfect anagram for moronic. Coincidence? Like in Brave New World, alphas, betas, deltas, and epsilons, which are the morons. No homogeneity.
But today, in America, we have no homogeneity. It is not only that so many of the faces look evil, brutish, slack, stupid and dirty, but they are foreign, they look alien, and they are alien to one another. Minorities write the law of the land. Minorities of aliens, multitudes of them, grow fat and rule, while the bulk of the people, many of them descendants of those who founded and built the country, who love it and would die for it, are turned into patient, befuddled suckers who foot the bills to finance their own destruction.
We know the same program is going on in all white countries today. The recently elected Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, is of Indian descent. Rishi means saint, and Sunak means dog in Sanskrit, so saint dog, and dog is the inverse of God. Saint dog would mean man becoming God, which is exactly the philosophy of the ones in power today. Morals and dogma. Dogma backwards is am God. And we know 10 is another way for them to write I-O, their androgynous Baphomet, the Masonic black door with white lettering flanked by the Masonic brickwork. Rishi Sunak, Saint Dog, Morals and Dogma, am God. Notice the briefcase going from red to green. Green light? It's a go with Rishi.
The most disturbing feature of the population problem is the fact that the largest number of children per marriage is born to human riffraff, where the men who can most surely be counted upon to produce capacity in their children are not even perpetuating themselves. The land is being slowly handed over to the masses. Every nation has a proportion of people who, by their very existence, and as long as they live, can do nothing but cause problems and be a burden on the backs of the rest of society.
The doctrine of the thoroughbred.
At least 1 out of every 10 person, to put it very conservatively and safely, has to be carried by the rest of us. Year by year, the people approach even nearer to the state of a confused and helpless horde. America is a veritable cult of the mongrel, of the hybrid.
On inbreeding. Now here we get into another taboo topic, but unlike child brides, I agree with Simpson on inbreeding. We have to look at what inbreeding actually is and not get triggered by the social programming placed on the word.
Simpson quotes Darwin stating, "In England and many parts of Europe, the marriages of cousins are objected to from their supposed injurious consequences. But this belief rests on no direct evidence. It is therefore manifestly desirable that the belief should either be proven false or should be confirmed."
Like should marry like, kind should be with kind. Darwin married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood. The kings of Persia intermarried with their sisters. The Athenians and Spartans intermarried in the beginning when the tribes of Phrygia were first forming. Brothers, sisters, cousins had to engage with one another to perpetuate our tribe. And if we look to nature, we don't see red-headed cardinals mating with full reds or red bulbul cardinals. Not only that, birds are very territorial and they wouldn't even fly outside of their flock to mate. So essentially, they would have to mate with their siblings to perpetuate their tribe, their flock. But we humans are more social and mingle outside of our immediate familial units. And so if we mate with as like kind as possible outside of our family unit, we can achieve similar results. We should look for a mate as close to ourselves as possible. So for example, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Phrygian with an IQ of 125 should look for a Phrygian boy with blonde hair and blue eyes of equal intelligence. Like attracts like. So this wouldn't be so hard if it wasn't for all of the social conditioning put upon us. By not being conscious of who we seek for a partner and ending up with someone that is not like kind, like the moronic saying, opposites attract, is detrimental to our gene pool. It is evolution in reverse. It is inverse eugenics.
Simpson goes one step further on what it means to marry outside of our race and IQ level by saying, any system of values that consistently weakens or poisons or frustrates life by that single token is seen to be in fact the supreme immorality. To portray ascending life, the purpose of which is ever to surpass itself, ever to give birth to that which is beyond itself, that is the supreme crime, worse than embezzlement, worse than treason, worse than adultery or rape, worse than murder. This is what I think of any religion or morality or political doctrine that would sacrifice the whole to the part and betray the higher to the lower.
Hitler knew this and offered a most decent proposal to young men and women in Germany. To promote the making of big German families, Hitler offered tax breaks to young couples. They would pay a quarter less taxes for the birth of each child, and so if the couple had 4 or more, they would pay no taxes. In addition, he had the German banks give loans at 0 interest so the young couple could buy a house. And he oversaw the manufacturing of the Volkswagen Beetle, a car so economic every German family could own one. So it's this idea of breeding outside of our tribe that is killing our tribe. The small hats breed within their tribe. They perpetuate their tribe, but somehow if we whites do the same, it is immoral for us. Breeding outside of our tribe is immoral, not inbreeding. Inbreeding is moral and follows the laws of nature. Inbreeding, another term they have taken and used against us. Racism, eugenics, and inbreeding are what keep our tribes whole and healthy, but through social programming we are taught the inverse of the truth. Is race a reality? The small hat and former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Benjamin Disraeli, Disraeli means of Israel, actually wrote, "All is race, there is no other truth. It is the key to history, and every race must fall which carelessly suffers its blood to become mixed."
In the case of the dying Persian, where one can see at a glance not only the vast difference between Persian and Assyrian, Arab, Jew or Negro, but also that the ancient Persian and Greek were like enough to be cousins, and obviously were sprung from the same Nordic and Aryan stock.
Yes, and the Orlinda book proves that they did. Persians were simply Phryans, Aryans, that had migrated to India and then over to Persia. These were followers of Geert, known as the Geertmana, and today known as the Germans, who lived for thousands of years in these areas, racially pure until at last they sailed back to Phrygia's land. The ones that stayed behind would have eventually mixed, by their free will or not, with the locals, and so left some of their blood in the veins of the Indians and Persians with the lighter complexions. Now let's look at what some of our higher men have said on the topic. What Jefferson really said on the race issue. Nature, habit, opinion have drawn indelible lines of distinction between them. It is still in our power to direct the process of emancipation and deportation peaceably and in such slow degree as that the evil will wear off insensibly, and their place be, pari passu, filled up by free white laborers. If, on the contrary, it is left to force itself on, human nature must shudder at the prospect held up.
When Jefferson penned the term, "All men are created equal," in the Declaration of Independence, as a rally cry of his fellow citizens against the King of England, it referred to equality of rights as between two groups of Anglo-Saxons, and it could scarcely have occurred to Jefferson and his contemporaries that future generations would strain these words to refer to equality of innate capacity among different races. Jefferson's published writings prove that he believed the Negro to be grossly inferior to whites, both in their mentality and in their character.
What Lincoln really said on the race issue was even firmer than Jefferson's comments, since the equalitarian doctrine was being pushed on the American people all the more just 60 years later. I have no purpose to introduce political and social equality between the white and black races. I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, not of qualifying them to hold office or intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this that there is a physical difference between the white and black race, which I believe will forever forbid the races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior, and I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. I give the most solemn pledge that I will to the very last stand by the law of the state which forbids the marrying of white people with Negroes.
Like Jefferson, Madison and Clay before him, Lincoln believed that the only sure solution of the race problem in our country was the complete removal of the Negro from our soil. He conceived a plan for it during the Civil War, and Congress persuaded to make the necessary initial appropriations. He also proposed an amendment to the federal constitution that would have authorised Congress to put his ideal of full repatriation into effect.
So we saw Jefferson's stance and we saw Lincoln's stance when the race issue was even more dire. What about today? What do our presidents of today do? They not only let our land be flooded with aliens, they help them by arranging for buses to deliver them all over our country, put them up in hotels, and give them credit cards to purchase food and other necessities. They talk about building a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, but we know it will never happen because these modern-day presidents are completely controlled by the international bankers, the Jews. The advancement of communism.
But no matter what may be said about the methods the equalitarians have used, all informed men must acknowledge that they have made enormous progress towards their goal of an equalitarian world. That which 30 years ago appeared only in books and papers is now preached, taught, proclaimed, accepted, ordered, and enforced everywhere.
And this was in 1970. Look how much farther they have come today. By their audacity and by using their superior position, they are drowning their opponents in noise. On the history of the Negro.
Despite what you've been told, Negro history has not been obliterated. There wasn't any. During the past 5,000 years, the history of Black Africa is blank. Not just here, everywhere. It's blank in Africa too. Until other races arrived, there was no literate civilization south of the Sahara Desert. The black African had not invented a plough or a wheel, domesticated an animal or a crop. He had no written language, and therefore, of course, no literature whatsoever, no numerals, no calendar, or system of measurement. What cannot be too often and too forcefully stressed is that all developments such as roads, railways, bridges, irrigation schemes, mines, factories, schools, hospitals, and so on in Africa south of the Sahara have been solely due to the initiative of Europeans. The still largely primitive Africans have not as yet acquired the necessary skill merely to maintain the legacy left by whites, let alone to organise further developments.
In Rhodesia, back in the late 80s, now called Zimbabwe, they ran all the white farmers out of the country during the Bush War. And so, in just a few short months, the blacks either didn't want to work the fields or they didn't know how to. The farm equipment went to shit for lack of maintenance, and the farm stopped producing food. The Rhodesian government was begging for the white farmers to return to the country and farm. The country went from one that was wholly able to feed its people to one that needed handouts from the world community or its people would starve. The history of Haiti.
After the Negroes massacred the last of the white population in 1804, Haiti remained a part of Santo Domingo until 1844, when it became a separate republic. Between 1844 and 1915, only one Haitian president completed his term of office. 14 were ousted by armed uprisings, one was blown up, one was poisoned, and another was hacked to pieces by a mob. Between 1908 and 1915, the revolutions and assassinations increased so rapidly that a United States military occupation was needed to restore order. This lasted from 1915 to 1934. Thereafter followed 12 years of rule by a mulatto elite, which ended in the resumption of control by the black military in 1946. Since then, wholesale corruption and political murder have been the rule. As soon as he is left to himself, he everywhere falls back into the most absolute, primitive African savagery. What all this reveals is not only lack of intelligence and long experience in civilised living, but inflammable emotions, absence of self-control and self-discipline, and raw instincts that border on the beast. When these observations are placed side by side with the records of monstrous African savagery within the past decade, and we recall the inevitable genetic sequences that bind generations together, we know that to the extent to which any Negro today in the United States carries in him the genes that trace back to his savage African forebears, we must expect that sooner or later, here or there, under provocation or without provocation, the beast in him will come out.
Our nature is built into our DNA. We are different under the skin. We can't make any species that has a particular nature into one without this particular nature. More prone to violence, living in the now, not understanding consequences, lacking empathy, is the nature of a particular race. Negroes in America today.
Unrelenting propaganda has brought it about that any racial discrimination against Negroes is now almost universally looked upon as a sign of ignorance, and evidence of moral and spiritual benightedness and degeneracy. Befuddled and spiritless whites have come to fear it as a kind of disgrace, of which they are at pains and always in haste to clear themselves. Hollywood, for decades, has been putting on an endless succession of plays in which the Negro males make love to white women, openly giving the impression that such relations are permissible, and even that they are now quite the thing. Television brazenly pictures comely young blonde women in the embraces of the blackest and most devilish looking Negroes, who have the appearance more of apes than of men. This tends to give our women the impression not only that we are in a new moral world where virtually anything is permitted, but moreover that affairs with Negroes are the vogue, and that thereby their social status can actually be improved. Negro men make the most satisfying sexual partners, they are led to believe, and since relations with them cease to be shameful and need no longer be clandestine, they may, with good reason, be welcomed and even invited. Despite the Negro's inferior intelligence and his origin in what every civilised society in the world looks down upon as its lowest class, amours and even marriage with him serve as a means by which a white woman can demonstrate to the world that she belongs to the intellectual avant-garde of the new age, that she is emancipated from conventions and champions the brotherhood of man.
Like lambs to the slaughter.
All authority and force and machinery of the white man's world, which ought to operate for our own well-being and to save us, seems to be in the hands of those who seek our destruction. And as things are now, with the way to integration and to race mixing laid wide open, made smooth and easy, and pleasant and even profitable, and with white people behaving like a drove of stupid sheep, being tricked, kicked, goaded, and whipped into accepting and following it, the disaster must come swiftly. And it was this prospect of exactly this fate that made Jefferson shudder and Lincoln appalled.
The fateful crisis confronting Western man. Nowhere can one discern the slightest indication that in the great majority of our people the racial instinct of self-preservation has not been lost. The question remains unanswered, however, for we cannot yet determine whether the instinct has been extinguished or is merely in abeyance while our people are in a kind of cataleptic trance from which they may be aroused by physical suffering and acute privation when the time comes, as it assuredly will in a few years. We are born into this time, and there is no escape from it save in death. Our situation is desperate, and we can afford no illusions, no retreat into a land of dreams. Now, more than ever, optimism is cowardice. Revillo P. Oliver.
Nothing can disturb their confidence that the United States is invincible, that an enemy who might assail their walls would be repulsed, and therefore they don't have even the shadow of a suspicion that the enemy who is most likely to destroy them has long been deeply entrenched inside their own defences.
Symptoms of decay and breakdown from within include 1. A rapid increase in lawlessness and crime. Just look at San Francisco, for example. Store employees don't even stop thieves from stealing whatever they want. And with most crimes in California today, once a perpetrator gets arrested, they let them back out on the streets. No bail needed, with just a court summons. 2. The deterioration and breakdown of our entire system of education, with big-breasted trannies teaching our children and reading books about how to perform anal and oral sex. 3. The flabbiness and ill health of our children, with boys commonly now developing breasts. Just a generation before, we never saw this. 4. The promiscuity of our younger generation, with their gutter mouths and complete defiance of authority. And 5. Turning our young boys and girls into LGBTQ lost souls who can't have a normal family with children, another tool of theirs to lower the white population. Civil war is upon us.
The desperateness of the situation only grows upon us as we witness the universal turmoil and tension that pervade the country, turning one class segment of the population against another, until it seems we may be on the verge of tearing ourselves to pieces in a universal free-for-all civil war, in which each part of the population throws to the winds all concern for the general welfare in a struggle to establish its own dominance and promote its own interests. It is precisely in this remorseless situation, when he is most desperately in need of getting his bearings, of ascertaining where he is and how he can pull himself together, to move with a firm foot and with all the strength there is in him. It is precisely now, as never before in his history, that he finds himself most confused and shaky about right and wrong, high and low, and even about himself, about his past, and about his worth as compared with the rest of humanity.
Amity versus enmity.
I have been saying that the primary fact of life is conflict and struggle. All significant human development has been the result of rising to meet some challenge. However, men very early learn to relieve the pressure of the struggle on the individual and to increase his security and well-being by the formation of groups of individuals of like blood and experience, of like mind and interests, and united by allegiance to a dual code. Within the group, the rule was mutual trust, loyalty and cooperation, in short, amity. This, in due time, produced homogeneity and a solidarity in which was massed a strength vastly beyond anything, with the reach of the individual standing alone. Fortified with this strength, the group faced outsiders, all those who did not belong to it, and this is the other side of the dual code. With indifference, suspicion, antagonism, and readiness for war, here the rule was enmity.
Look how close enmity is to enemy. Enmity, enemy. I differ with Simpson here only in that we started out as a homogeneous group. We were born in a tribe of like kind. We didn't have to gravitate together because of common interests, etc. Each tribe was born in their particular zoological zones, and only because of travel, due to natural disasters or exploration, did we come across each other and then eventually mix.
Lincoln's efforts to hold off the international bankers had ended in his assassination, and the country was more and more given over to the looters. By 1920, America has taken in over 23 million immigrants, largely from southeastern Europe, from those of its people most alien to our original stock of blood. Since then, we have dumped additional millions of foreigners upon ourselves from all parts of the earth: Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Hawaiians, Japanese, Chinese, and, of course, from the very beginning of our country, a steady influx of Jews, who by now have thoroughly honeycombed our society from top to bottom. The most gifted of all this non-Nordic immigration, the Jews and the Mongolians, have in any case been so determined to maintain their racial identity as to make assimilation virtually impossible. They have simply become insisted as a foreign organism in our body politic, and thus all this vast conglomeration of alienness was added to the great body of alienness that inheres in the 22 million Negroes in our midst. In consequence, the full-blooded Nordic man today often feels himself fairly swamped in alienness. He has lost his country. It has passed out of his hands. In effect, he has been dispossessed and is now living in what has become a land of foreigners.
A dirty word.
Though he was born to conquer and has an immemorial record of conquering behind him, conquest has been made a discredited word, almost a dirty word, and the thing itself a crime. Thus the white man has been left not only split and confused, but frustrated and even ashamed of himself, ashamed of his mastery, ashamed of his empires, ashamed even of his very ancestors, to whom he is supremely indebted for all that he is and for all that he has. Belief in equality has become the one orthodoxy that it is considered positively shameful and disreputable to question, and anyone that dares to challenge it will soon have all the new Inquisition beating down on him to cow him into submission or even to destroy him. The white man's own judgment as to what is true and false, right and wrong, have come to be shaken by the conflicting indoctrination he has undergone. It keeps him from acting upon his disgust, his indignation and anger when they seize upon him, is the fact that he does not know where or how to lay his hand with any certainty on those who are of his own kind, his own race, who could be counted on to stand with him. Without such solidarity, there is no way by which, in an hour of supreme peril, the strength of one can suddenly be multiplied into the strength of millions. There is no means, in fact, by which they can even find one another in a crowd. They have been gradually broken down into a loose collection of separate units, each pretty much fending for himself, and often, it seems, virtually lost in a motley mass of humanity.
On the Jews. The Jews were the Magi of old that the Friends tried to warn us about. The Magi and their Christianity were our enemies even back then. But alas, a portion of our people were more concerned with service to self and sold out their countrymen for a more comfortable life, and so didn't listen to the warnings and embraced both. We who have posed as the saviors of the world, we who have even boasted of having given it the Savior, we are today nothing else than the world's seducers, its destroyers, its incendiaries, its executioners. Dr. Oscar Levy. The traitor Odin has been turned into one of our gods by the traitors.
Their operation is so insidious that exceedingly few of our people have any awareness of what has been going on, and of what, in consequence, hangs over them. For one thing, they have lived in a false sense of security, growing out of their very numbers. But more than that, there's a kind of warfare very contrary to their traditions and their instincts, and largely outside their experience. If a man clouts us on the head, as it were, we can pretty well be counted on to square off against him. But when we fight a man, we will do it openly. We are not looking for sneak attacks. We despise hitting below the belt. No matter what incidents may be told of Nordic men to the contrary, there is no denying that. From the days of the first Aryans in India and Persia down to the modern Scandinavians and British, the legends and sagas of our forefathers have held us before our people the ideals of honour, courage, truthfulness and straightforward dealing. In consequence, when an enemy comes against us with poison bait, traps, lies, hypnotism and plausible suggestions, we tend to fall an easy victim. We have never learned to be on guard against an enemy, especially an enemy within our gates, who had devoted the sharpening of his intellect to make him sly and wily, and thus we have left ourselves without adequate protection. Hence, our peoples need today to be alerted to the almost invisible siege that was long ago laid against them. They have consistently succeeded in forcing their will upon our people to their great advantage and our great hurt.
Usurocracy. The Friends also tried to warn us about usury. They knew in their hearts it was immoral, but alas, we didn't listen. In modern day, the poet Ezra Pound raised the alarm as well. He coined the system usurocracy, which means the rule of the big usurers combined in conspiracy. They rewarded Ezra for bringing this awareness to his people by putting him in an insane asylum, where he remained a prisoner until a few years before his death.
Our present money system is the most fantastic, the most morally monstrous, the most treasonous and alarming affair in the history of mankind. So much is the issuing of money a mark of a government's sovereignty, that whenever it is surrendered, the government ceases to be the real ruler, ceases to be free, and becomes little better than a puppet in the hands of a power greater than itself, which it is forced to obey. The Constitution gave to Congress the power to coin money and to regulate its value, to the end that the price level should remain stable, even from generation to generation.
Lincoln was killed, yes, because he wanted to send the slaves back to Africa, but also because he issued greenbacks, which essentially cut out the middleman, the international bankers, who couldn't profit off of them. Hitler did the same thing. He wanted to send them back to Israel, but also he issued his own version of greenbacks, cutting the middleman out once again.
What Lincoln gave the American people, Hitler gave the German people their own paper to pay their own debts.
Remember the stories of no gold in Fort Knox? Or how there was all this gold in the basement of the World Trade Center that suddenly disappeared? Or how about Alex Jones selling all the newly awakened gold, explaining that fiat currency is bad because it has no intrinsic value? Remember that? These were all planted by the bankers because they didn't want us to know that the best system is one in which is backed by the trust of the people in their government and is interest-free. No gold backing needed. The truth behind World War II.
Hitler began his rule by breaking with the international bankers. He believed that Germany could never be a sovereign and really independent state so long as she had to live on borrowed money. Instead of going to the bankers for money to buy what she had to procure from abroad, she bartered, that is, swapped, some of her surplus to obtain what she needed from the surplus of other nations, without debt being incurred on either side. And with this approach, Germany was soon crowding out all competitors. Moreover, for the money required to finance her vast programmes for a complete regeneration of the life of the German people, and for making Germany the most powerful state in Europe, he simply issued what money was needed on the authority of the German government, and based it not on gold, of which he had none, but on the productive wealth of the land within German confines, combined with the productivity inherent in German brains and German labour. And it proved sound. It worked. In less than 10 years, Germany became easily the most powerful state in Europe. It worked so magically and magnificently that it sounded the death knell of the entire Jewish money system. World Jewry knew that they had to destroy Hitler's system by whatever means might prove necessary, or their own would necessarily die, and if it died, with it must die their dream and their hope of making themselves masters of the world. The primary issue over which the Second World War was fought was to determine which money system was to survive. At bottom, it was not a war between Germany and the so-called Allies. Primarily, it was a war to the death between Germany and the international money power. In this war, Germany fought for Europe, the racial homeland of Nordic white men and the cradle of Western civilization, while Britain, France and the United States were deliberately tricked into betraying their own kind and joining hands with their Jewish enemies to make this international money power the master of the world. The plain consequence was that we fought to fasten the manacles of slavery on our own wrists, and we probably sealed the white man's doom.
The United States of America.
We have become so used to our Jewishness that it would almost require the clear eyes of a creature from Mars to perceive how Jewish we are. The Jew has taken our very land from under us and ruined it. He has taken our civilization and our whole intellectual and spiritual world and perverted it, soiled it, corrupted it, and all but destroyed it. And he means also to destroy us as a people, utterly beyond recovery, in body as well as in mind and soul. And he has done it in wanton betrayal of our trust, after he had sworn allegiance to the country of his adoption, after we had taken him in and given him harbourage and opportunity and protection, as if he were one of our kind. He has done it in every country of the white man's world, but worst of all, in the heartland of our world, in Europe and Britain. He has always done it, wherever he went. He will always go on doing it, unless he is stopped. A friend of mine in New York, years ago, observed, in my judgment, quite justly, that the Jew has us by the throat and will see us dead before he relaxes his hold. Since the Jew has never yet, anywhere, built a great state or civilization, it is safe to assume that he cannot. It isn't in him, but he is the most fearful destroyer in the history of man. For when our government is overthrown and the independence of the United States come to an end, it will be only a matter of time until there will be that reign of terror and that mass liquidation of opponents which all modern social revolutions have used to consolidate their gains. If precedent in other countries may be accepted as a basis for a reliable estimate, some 20 million American men will be dragged out to be done to death in one manner or another. The purpose will be to strip our country of all those whose brains, courage, drive and devotion might enable them to tear the communist vampire off our backs. But, after all, I just can't imagine that any Jewish world despotism will hold together very long. On the face of it, nothing could be more preposterous than the idea of a handful of people undertaking to put some 3 billion human beings in chains and to hold them there. The Jew simply does not know how to rule wisely and beneficently, with understanding, generosity and humanity. His rule would surely chafe and gall, then incense and finally infuriate to such a degree that no threats or punishments would long hold down the universal seething insurrection that, in the end, would surely sweep him away. Which way goest thou, Western man?
Unfortunately, there is nowhere to go today. We are past the point of no return. The best we can do is wake up as many of our people as possible so they can get a firm footing to fight. Overcoming them is nearly impossible now. We need a reset. Reset is one letter off from rest. We need the reset so we can rest, so we can enter the next phase on World's wheel, the golden age. But like I was telling Scotland Sean, I don't like the word golden. It reminds me of our usurpers. I prefer calling it the Aryan age. Reset, rest, peace. My fellow Aryans, all the best, Kat. I want to add a big thank you here, too, for my good friend Scotland Sean, who helped me with this voiceover. I told him before that if we could hear Walda speak, he would have a Scottish accent like Sean's. 'Tis true.
All the money that I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades that I had, they are sorry for my going away. And all the sweethearts that I had, they would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. A man may drink and not be drunk. A man may fight and not be slain. A man may court a pretty girl and perhaps be welcome back again. But since it has so ought to be, by a time to rise and a time to fall, come fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy